She asked it as if the world had a simple answer. Why is she sleeping on the bench? Lily's voice cut through the late autumn air, small and steady, carrying the smell of roasted chestnuts from a vendor wheel not far away. The park was a patchwork of gold and damp. Leaves shushed underfoot, and a thin sun leaned low, making everything look as if it had been brushed with light. A woman lay curled under a threadbare blanket on the bench, a faded scarf pulled up to her chin, a tiny bundle held close to her chest. Lily waited for someone older to explain, but the explanation did not come. If you like quiet, true stories about ordinary people whose kindness changes everything, stay until the end. And if this kind of story warms your heart, subscribe and like. David had not meant to be in the park. His calendar had been a careful stack of meetings and strategy calls, each item a slab of certainty he could lean on. He came because Lily had insisted, because a single Saturday in the city belonged to her, and because she liked the vendor who toasted chestnuts slowly, stirring them with a wooden paddle until they cracked open like small warm promises. He wore a tailored coat, the dark wool catching the light the way a river catches sky. The scarf Lily had wrapped around his neck kept the wind from biting. He moved through people with the same quiet command he used in boardrooms, noticing, not touching, making the path for others. He noticed the woman because Lily asked him to look. He noticed the infant because Lily pointed with two stubby fingers, lips pursed in that serious way children use when asking the hard questions of the world. The infant's face was small and flushed, the mouth open in a sleep that was not easy. Anna's eyelashes lay like thin fans against her cheek. Around them, the park hummed on. The metallic chirp of a distant bicycle, the occasional bark, the vendor's tired laugh. But there was a stillness close to the bench, like the hush around a small wound. David approached slowly. He had been the kind of man who measured risk, who counted outcomes before he committed breath to action. Here, the calculation narrowed to one stubborn, immediate fact. There was a baby, and the baby looked too hot for the air. His hands were steady as he knelt to look, the world reduced to shallow circles around the child. Anna woke with a start when he reached over the blanket to check the infant's forehead. Her first sight was the exact line of his jaw, clean, precise, the smell of his coat, the muffled city sounds rearranged by alarm. Her body went hard at once, a small animal's reflex. She had learned to disappear at the right speed. Her voice when it came was clipped and fierce. "Don't touch him," she said. "Don't wake him." David's hands retreated as if burned. He kept his distance, he said evenly. Can I help? Is he your son?" "My son," Anna said, as if the title itself were defense. She tightened the blanket around the baby, then sank back as if the brief exertion had cost her something. "Ethan," she added, like a coin dropped and named. Lily tugged at David's sleeve with the patient insistence of children who believe in straightforward solutions. "He's sweating," she said. "He's hot. He might be sick." The woman on the bench stared at Lily for a long second, and then, exhausted, allowed a corner of a smile. Lily had a way of speaking that did not pretend to hold back judgment. It was blunt and small and, on that day, dangerous for Anna's resolve. She let the smallest shadow of humor cross her face, a crack in a wall that had held too much. "I don't want charity," Anna said. The words were plain, blunt as the bench beneath her. She had been told once, years back, that there was dignity in refusal. She had taken refuge in those lines. She could list the times one gives money and loses respect. She could recount the sharpness in the eyes of strangers who pretended pity as a performance. The memory of her mother's last sentence, "You always make us look guilty," sat behind her like a stone. David had no taste for platitudes. He had a daughter who asked questions that required answers. He had a housekeeper who expected standards, and a life built on the assumption that problems could be solved if people with resources stepped in quietly and smartly. He listened to Anna's refusal, and then he did something he rarely did. He broke his own rules about distance. "One night," he said. The words were neither dramatic nor magnanimous. They were logistical, the simplest way to move from bench to bed without making a sermon of it. Anna's eyes flicked to him, suspicious. "One night," she repeated, the syllables tasting of bargain. "Not charity." "Not charity," he affirmed. Lily's eyes shone. She had been part of the negotiation by implication, and children often carry the moral weight of ordinary scenes better than adults. "Just a roof," David said. "A place to be warm. No questions. In the morning, we'll discuss what comes next." Anna's mind raced through the small practicalities that shaped her life. The stairs at his building, the elevator that smelled faintly of lemon, the arrangement of rooms where she would not be seen as a spectacle. She thought of Mrs. Hill, of the way servants and employees watched a life rearrange itself like a drop in a cup of tea. She thought of the little seam at Nathan's corner where a blanket could hide the truth of being on the street. There was pride and there was calculation. In the end, the baby's cough won over the rest. When David lifted the infant, he did so as if he had been trained, practicing for this moment all his life. There was a gentleness in the cradle of his arm that surprised him. Anna watched, bristling and soft in the same breath. Her hands hovered, then folded against her knees. The baby stirred and let out a small, low complaint. Ethan's eyelids fluttered like pale flags. They walked up to the building with Lily holding Anna's gloved hand by habit, something she did when a story sounded like it needed a witness. The doorman recognized David and opened the revolving door with the automatic politeness reserved for familiar passes. They moved through marble and glass into a world of quiet thermostats and thick rugs, of spaced-out lighting that rendered the city noise into a distant white sound. Mrs. Hill met them at the penthouse threshold with the sharpness of someone who guarded boundaries by muscle memory. She was not unkind, but she had an instinctive protectiveness that often translated into suspicion. Her eyes slid over Anna and lingered on the blanket, on the unpolished shoes, on the stir of hair. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, curt. "Who is this?" "Anna," David said. He kept the name simple, an anchor. "She'll stay one night." Mrs. Hill's mouth thinned. "We are not a shelter, sir." "I know," David said. "Just one night." Anna kept her head down, hands folded, eyes trained on the infant. She watched the penthouse like a foreign landscape. Books on shelves with measured gaps between them. A grand piano whose lacquer reflected light like a pond. Cushions plumped to the choreography of household staff. She had seen this world in a different life, at dinners where she had once worked as a server, where people let their eyes soften for the charity they performed. Those memories tempered her pride. Dinner that night was a small, functional thing. Mrs. Hill prepared soup and bread in a kitchen that smelled of butter and lemon. She set down plates with the same precise, protective hands she used to fold napkins into small, exact shapes. Lily ate without ceremony, insisting that Anna try the warm bread. Anna took a bite like someone testing the temperature of a bath, then another as if counting the seconds of permission. David listened more than he spoke. He watched Anna's fingers when she talked, the small tremor at the edge of her voice when she refused to tell of where she'd slept before the bench. She said enough, and not the whole story. There were gaps that would not be forced open. He accepted that. Part of his learning to be useful would be to hold the silence that other people's dignity required. In the bedroom Anna was given, the blankets were thick and a little perfumed from the linen service. She slept like someone who had not slept properly in a long span, one deep loop where the world did not demand constant vigilance. David hesitated at the doorway, the silhouette of his shoulders drawn against a city that had never been a place for vulnerability. He stood a moment, then left a scarf across the foot of the bed. It was an unremarked gesture. Small acts mattered in ways speeches never did. Over the next days, the house taught itself around them. Anna learned where to leave the kettle if she wanted coffee in the morning. Lily taught her how the television remote worked, with blunt efficiency. The infant, Ethan, was a steady axis. Anna fed him with an expertise that had been pressed into place by necessity. David learned to set aside boardroom nights if Lily wanted pancakes. Mrs. Hill watched the routines like a sentinel and, with time, ceased to scowl so often. Small rituals created a provisional order. Anna, who had once sketched on brown paper bags while waiting tables, began to pull out a pad into the quiet corner of the living room. She drew the little things that had always saved her: shapes of hands, the slope of a child's cheek, the way light pooled on a bench. Her pencil left marks like the soft steps of a returning bird. The act of drawing became her private affirmation that she was not disappearing. David found pockets of silence where he could see her doing it: at the window where the city narrowed into a band of twinkling lights, on the terrace where a small herb garden tried to thrive. He watched the way she frowned when a line did not match the image in her head, and the way she smiled when a smear of charcoal became, in her eyes, the exact arc of a laugh. He learned the vocabulary of her concentration: the breath swallowed, the tilt of the head, the bend of the wrist. He learned not to interrupt those syllables of attention. There were social tests. In a life assembled around quiet assumptions, an unknown tenement of need would have consequences. Mrs. Hill gave David a list of potential issues, without malice, a steady stream of hypothetical difficulties that came from the practical conviction that the household's equilibrium could not be rearranged without cost. "People talk, sir," she said once, folding a tea-cloth with a precision that sounded like argument. "It will be awkward at the luncheon next week." David had not considered the luncheon, not as a threat. He had considered spreadsheets and a new marketing campaign. Then he found himself cataloging choices like a man who had learned to predict outcomes. Keep her hidden. Explain she was an assistant who had missed a train. Or tell the truth and accept the friction. He found his chest tightening at the thought of people judging someone for needing help. His instinct to control met an older instinct, a guarded reluctance to let his private decisions be pried open by public opinion. Anna moved through the house like one who was both visitor and owner of a secret. She accepted meals and warmth, yet refused to be patronized. When guests arrived, she retreated to a corner with a sketchbook as if the world were a long room she could politely ignore. David introduced her carefully at first, a name laid down with no explanatory flounce. Some friends were puzzled, others were curious. A few led with their envy. One woman, a member of the city's social scene who prided herself on being blunt and decisive, arched an eyebrow and made a small joke that was not a joke. "A charitable act for the weekend?" she asked. Delicate and knife-thin. Anna's jaw tightened. She felt very small under the circling candles of conversation. David took her hand under the table with a steadiness she could not wholly resist. The touch was not a claim of ownership. It was a quieting line, a signal that he was not going to explain her away. In private, after the guests left, Anna slept like someone who had been allowed a small victory. She woke to sunlight that smelled faintly of lemon and to the sound of Lily's delighted laugh as she tried to teach Ethan fingers to curl around cereal crumbs. There was laughter and the ordinary sloppy miracles of domestic life. Spilled bowls, a paint smudge on a sleeve, a baby sock lost behind a cushion. It is odd how quickly a house learns to hold people. Anna's voice loosened. She laughed when Lily drew in her sketchbook with a waxy crayon and declared the scribble a dog. She let David show her how to set the thermostat without turning it into performance. One morning, as rain blurred the city like a watercolor left in the sink, David found a drawing tucked into his briefcase by accident. It was the black and white image of a bench with a small figure under a blanket and a child standing nearby holding a bag of chestnuts. In the corner, in careful handwriting, was a quick notation: "For warm hands." He recognized the line of the scarf. He had left it at the foot of Anna's bed that first night. He tucked the page into his jacket like a map. The first real test came when David had to choose between boardroom and something else. It was the kind of decision he had always thought he would make on spreadsheets. Leave the meeting to someone else, delegate, or else take the call and maintain the image of unflappable presence. He chose the other thing, a sudden update from a pediatrician that Ethan's fever had spiked. He closed his laptop and went to the hospital with sweat at his hairline from the habit of being late to personal matters for a lifetime. At the hospital, the antiseptic smell was a sharp, honest thing that erased pretenses. Machines hummed an impartial music. A nurse with quick fingers and a calm voice took over while the doctor explained things in measured sentences. Anna sat like someone who had been traveling for a long time and had finally reached the station where other passengers could share the weight of a suitcase. Held Ethan close and let her face show fear without apology. David sat with his tie loosened, sleeves rolled, as if he had shed a layer of himself that had not been useful in this room. Hours measured themselves by coffee cups and the small tilt of the infant's breathing. The fever yielded slowly to medicine and rest, and at some point the monitor charted a small writing. The breakthrough was not dramatic. It was a soft return, like the resumption of a conversation paused only for a breath. David, exhausted and raw in a way that no boardroom had ever pried open, felt something shift in his chest. He had been strong in ways that counted at quarterly meetings. He had not known the particular courage of staying in a chair long enough for life to turn toward the people in it. There was a moment, over the low sound of the nurse's shoes on linoleum, when Anna looked at him, not at the hospital staff, not at the fluorescents, but at him, with a sudden, unpracticed softness. "Thank you," she said, the words small as the press of a thumb. David wanted to say something large and declarative, the kind of phrase he had practiced for speeches. Instead, he leaned forward and placed his hand at the small of her back. The touch was practical and a little clumsy and utterly honest. "You're safe now," he said. "Let someone be strong for you." The sentence was not a surrender of control, it was an offer. It had no grand promises embedded in it, only a willingness to be present. Anna's eyes filled with a dampness that she had not intended to look like gratitude. She had kept too many people at distance by the force of her refusal. Here, in the antiseptic light, the distance seemed less necessary. She allowed the possibility of acceptance to creep into the margin of her defenses. When they left the hospital, the city was wet and flattened like a painting that had been pressed under glass. Rain slid down car windows in soft streaks. Streetlights diffused into halos. Lily, who had been made to sleep on a couch for the vigil, rubbed her eyes and declared that the clouds looked like someone had sighed. She insisted they stopped for chestnuts on the way home and fed one to Ethan with solemn ceremony, as if a nut could be the seal on a day that had nearly unraveled. There would be other tests. Mrs. Hill would not be immediately convinced. She would find reasons to remind David of professional reputations and the neat order of schedules. Anna's mother would call once, snapped off in cold, and in that exchange Anna would learn once more that family does not always equal refuge. A socialite at a charity gala would make a small public display of embarrassment for David's decision. But the hospital night rearranged the geometry of their lives. Once someone had been given presence in a crisis, it was harder to pretend they were a temporary accessory. Anna began, quietly, to draw more. She took a corner in the penthouse studio, a room that smelled faintly of turpentine and lemon polish, and she spread out paper and charcoal like someone reassembling the pieces of a life. Lily would sit cross-legged and watch, asking questions about the sweep of a line. David brought her a boiled egg the way someone leaving a meeting might bring flowers, not out of performance, but because he had learned that small thoughtfulness accrued like interest. Her work changed in the way of things that have room to breathe. Where once her lines were small and defensive, they opened up, took risks on shape and negative space. She drew benches and toddlers, hands, and the way light pooled on a blanket. She experimented with color, warm ochres and the odd defiant smear of cobalt. When she painted, she smelled the paint like rain smells wet pavement, a promising, dangerous scent. An unexpected invitation arrived one late spring afternoon. A gallery manager, who had seen a sketch Anna left tucked inside a book at a cafe where the staff occasionally hung her torn postcards, sent a short note. Would she consider showing some pieces in a small group show? It was cautious, the invitation measured in the English of professionals. Anna read it twice, and then 3 times. The idea of being seen in a public way mattered with a peculiar weight. She had fought for dignity by refusing help. The thought of her work being appreciated was a kind of return of that dignity. David saw the letter and saw the tremor in Anna's hands while she read. He could have offered to smooth the way with introductions and sponsors. Instead, he said only, "If you want help setting it up, I'm here." It was an offer that respected agency. Anna accepted, and she arranged the pieces with help and stubborn patience. The gallery was small and intimate, the walls white and forgiving. The night of the opening came with the humid expectancy of a storm that chooses to wait. They attended together, David, Lily, Anna, moving into the room like people who had constructed tolerances for their combined vulnerabilities. The audience was modest, neighbors and a few curious locals, a couple who owned a small cafe that catered to artists. Anna was nervous in a way that had no equivalence to the earlier discomfort of public dinners. Her nerves were taut with the possibility that her work might reveal her, and that people might like what they saw. Recognition came slowly. A woman paused at a charcoal of a child's hand, and then, softly, asked Anna about her technique. A man in a gray jacket bought a small sketch and left a note. The gallery manager, who had been cautious at first, smiled in a way that signaled a shift. He saw both the craft and the market. Anna stood slightly to the side, answering questions in guarded bursts. Each response like a small door she opened and then gently closed. When people praised the honesty in her lines, she felt something unnameable loosen inside her sternum. It was not a blaze of overnight transformation. The paintings did not solve practicalities by themselves. There would still be arguments over childcare and scheduling, and Mrs. Hill would still resent the extra laundry. But recognition has a way of leaking into everyday life. The sketch folded into David's briefcase one morning joined another small piece, a postcard from a buyer, and the house learned to accept that the world might now treat Anna's work as both art and property. Months passed with a rhythm like a household learning a new song. Lily grew more confident. She drew with Anna sometimes, smudging charcoal on her knees and proudly naming a blotch a dragon. David learned to read a new kind of ledger, the calendar that balanced school recitals with studio time and nursing schedules. He negotiated with colleagues with a new steadiness that had less to do with posture and more to do with a refusal to let his life be tidy at the cost of people's dignity. Then the rain came back one night with a particular insistence. It came down as if the city itself had decided to be washed between one rhythm and the next. They had been at a small gathering, friends who loved art and had become friends of the odd family their life had assembled. On the way home, a gust lifted Anna's scarf and, for a moment, she and David walked together under a thin film of rain. The city lights blurred into long strokes. Lily skipped ahead, puddles making small explosions under her sneakers. They reached the penthouse building soaked and laughing, cheeks pink and hair flattened. The day felt honest. Their small household had held steady in the uneven equilibrium of life. Inside, there was the ordinary clutter of a shared life. A half-finished painting on the easel, a stack of bills tucked under David's planner, a baby sock balanced on a lamp. The roof had a small garden where mint and rosemary grew in planters. David often took Lily there with a cup of cocoa and explained how plants needed both sun and protection to grow. That evening, the rooftop smelled of wet earth and the faint smoke of a distant grill. But life, even when it is being mended, keeps tests in reserve. On an ordinary Tuesday in late summer, Ethan developed a cough that sounded small at first and then, like a secret, became all that could be heard in the room. Fever came like a tide. The first call to the pediatrician was a surge of cautious directives. The second was a phone call with instructions to head to the emergency room. David left a meeting he could not postpone and drove with a care that bordered on fury at himself for not noticing sooner. Anna's hands trembled as she held Ethan, the way a person holds a fragile vase that has been in a long line of moving boxes. At the hospital, fluorescent lights stretched the night into a long, thin thing. Nurses moved with the efficient kindness of people who have seen similar storms and learned to ride the center line of care. Medicine worked in honest increments. Their infants' breathing steadied slowly. The room filled with the low tilt of machines and the murmured talk of clinicians. Anna sat with the small, brittle facts of the night accumulated at her lips. The memory of cold benches, the names of streets she had known intimately, the ache of a mother who had little practice in asking for help. David sat beside her, chair sinking, his suit jacket discarded over the back like an unneeded shell. He had done this before, he realized, in different forms, staying where people needed him without performing for them. He watched Anna's face, the way she softened and then hardened. He had learned that people who had been conditioned to refuse trinkets of pity had a keener sense for the edges of offers. In the sterile light, he reached for a hand that trembled and held it. This time, the crisis tested not whether he would act, he had learned to act, but whether he would stay. The decision was not dramatic. It was the steady choice to sit in the chair as hours thinned and to resist the urge to leave for the world of calls that could wait. He stayed, in the same attentive way a harbor holds a ship. Later, when Ethan slept, with the fever broken into lines of pale sleep, Anna let herself curl into David's side for a breath. She allowed a small reliance that had no strings. She let herself be steady for once by accepting steadiness. In that quiet, no machines, the monitor's soft arithmetic reduced to a steady chirp, Anna said something that she had never said out loud. "I didn't think anyone would stay." David's reply was simple and steady, like a hinge opening. "I'm staying," he said. "We're staying." There were moments afterward, weeks, months, that would be harder and less visible. Mrs. Hill's returning doubts, Anna's mother's coldness at a holiday phone call, a public whisper at a charity brunch when David's name was tethered to a woman who did not fit the city's neat social categories. But Danny's voice, the city's voice, could not erase the small, painstaking acts that made their days. Anna's name began to circulate with her art. A small article praised the way she captured children and city benches with a tenderness that did not pity. They learned to argue and to reconcile, to manage schedules, and to accept that love and their life would be messy. Anna's drawings were shown in a larger gallery, and people began to come to the penthouse with small gifts of admiration. David taught Lily how to fold the corners of napkins precisely. Lily taught Ethan to wave at passing delivery trucks. They had, in the way of chosen things, created a family from friction and care. On a late summer evening that was luminous with a gold that felt like an answer, they climbed the stairs to the rooftop. The city spread below them, humming and bright, and the rooftop garden, edged with planters, smelled of rosemary and drying rain. Anna carried a new canvas. Lily held 2 cups of cocoa, careful with the lid, and Ethan, now a pudgy toddler, rested his head in Anna's shoulder as if the world had always been arranged for him this way. Lily asked the question she had asked once before, now older in her voice and steadier in her conviction. "Are we a family now?" David set down the canvas and reached for Anna's hand. Her fingers slid into his with a familiarity that had built itself over nights of vigilance and long afternoons of shared routines. The city spread below them like a promise kept. He looked at the 3 people he had come to shelter that first uncertain day and felt the absolute quiet of certainty settle in him. "Forever," he said, and the word fit like a scarf wrapped against cold. They sat there for a long time, Anna with paint on her fingers, the scent of turpentine and lemon mixing with the herbs. Lily leaning into David, Ethan dreaming against the curve of Anna's arm. The bench that had started everything became a story they told often, a myth of the precise moment when someone chose to do something ordinary and decisive. It was not a heroic tale. It was a daily victory achieved by the slow accrual of small mercies. Outside, the city lights blinked on like stitches sewing night to day. Inside, the household continued its small, steady life. Dinner plates set and cleared, charcoal smudges wiped off little hands, a note pinned to the fridge about a gallery opening next month. Life would keep offering tests, as it always did. Schedules to be negotiated, whispers to be shrugged off, but the difficult thing had been done. They had chosen one another. If this story moved you and you want more gentle tales of kindness and chosen family, please subscribe for more. Autumn came soft and deliberate, leaves turning in the same patient way their home had learned to turn toward one another. There were afternoons when old fears knocked at the door. A curt voicemail from Anna's mother, a tentative question from Mrs. Hill that carried the echo of former judgments. But those moments no longer bent the house like a storm. They met them with the small instruments they'd forged, a steady presence, a pot of stew handed over the threshold, an invitation that did not require explanations. Once, on a Sunday that smelled of rain and newspaper, Mrs. Hill stayed for longer than an hour. She sat awkwardly at the kitchen table while Lily poured tea, and when she left, she pressed a thin envelope into Anna's hand. Inside was a note, short, uncertain, and real, that said simply, "I was wrong to doubt. You are family to him." Anna folded the paper twice and kept it in the cookbook she used most. At the gallery opening, strangers lingered over a photograph of Ethan asleep in Anna's arms. They did not see pity there. They saw the careful weight of love. People began to ask about the bench, about the rooftop herbs, about how mornings were managed. The questions were ordinary. The answers were too. We choose each other. Years would come with new small reckonings, scraped knees, a first heartbreak, the complicated quiet when someone grows. But the choice held. Sometimes they walked to the park and sat on the bench that had started everything, watching a city that had once offered only distance now give back, in small gestures, its approval. They would keep choosing one another, day after patient day, until the choice itself felt like home.